Hey everybody, Dylan Ragland again. This is my presentation on my second article for Capstone. So even though I already kind of have my idea figured out of what I want to do, who I'm going to do it with, etc., I figured I'd take the opportunity to take a look at some other ideas, some other stuff that I'm interested in. I just kind of wanted to see what information was out there and something that I'm really interested in. I don't have any experience with it at all, but I'm super interested in 3D or ambisonic audio for VR and certain multimedia projects. So recently I helped with a capstone that kind of implemented this. It was not ambisonic or 3D audio, it was just audio in VR, which was very interesting. It was very, very interesting kind of figuring out how that concept worked, and it was really insane just all the thought that had to go into it before you even put a mic up. So this article that I found is a scientific publication from NASA. And as we can see here, they aren't really doing space stuff anymore. But this article is, I just titled it NASA's 3D Sound for VR and Multimedia. I'll try to include a link in the description to the article itself if you want to go read it. I think it's over 200 pages. It's something crazy. I kind of skimmed through a short portion of it. I went through each chapter and kind of touched each subject, which I'll sum up in this little short synopsis. Chapter 1 is, generally speaking, just kind of an overview of what VR/3D audio is. And it talks briefly about like the physical hardware and like the components of VR and how each little parameter, each little piece of equipment, it changes the entire experience for both the consumer and the systems engineer or designer. A really overarching concept that this journal discusses is the like physics, the psychoacoustics, like the parts of the inner ear that really goes into spatial hearing, like the ability to hear high, low, left, right, back, all that stuff. And it's really interesting seeing all the graphs and all the tests that they did to figure out kind of like what makes our ears tick. It's really interesting. If you want to read into it, I highly recommend it. Chapter 2 is again about spatial hearing, and it honestly, some of it's kind of long-winded, but I mean, what do you expect? It's a 240-something page scientific journal. Of course it's going to be long-winded. Chapter 3 was very, very interesting because it was discussing how our brain judges distance with, quote, perceived reverberation. And it's basically talking about how, like, even in this room, if I had a better microphone, you would be able to hear how far away, or theoretically, you would be able to hear how far away the wall is in front of me, or to the side of me, or behind me. You'd be able to hear basically the room that I'm in, given that I had the right kind of setup and you had the right kind of setup to hear it. Something that they really drive home is how important that is in the grand scheme of things and how our brains perceive sound. Because we know, even if we close our eyes and we talk in a room, we know at an instant about how big the room is, about how far away each wall is. And something that really kind of shows this off and how developed human ears are and the ability to do that are people who are blind to some degree and they have mastered echolocation. If you've never done research on that, I highly recommend it. It is so interesting seeing how they have trained themselves to hear the reverberations off of walls so that they know where they're at even without sight. Anyway, I'm on a tangent. Chapter 4 in this journal kind of goes over the signal processing, which is very in-depth. It's very, very, very specific signal processing. The signal processing that goes behind orienting the sounds in a 3D space. It seems very difficult, frankly, but I think it would be very interesting to explore it in the future. The rest of it is kind of just like conclusive, and it gives out resources, and it kind of talks about the implementation of these technologies and how we can create and simulate certain environments in 3D space. This is what I consider to be the definition of like a primary source. This is the best source that you can get for information on this particular topic, in my opinion, because it's peer-reviewed, scientific, tested, charts, graphs, everything is in there. This is basically a manual or like a handbook for 3D audio, ambisonic audio, and implementing that into a VR space. So in terms of having this in my pocket for a potential capstone, it's absolutely excessive. There is no earthly way that I am going to use this scientific level of information. However, if there was some strange instance in which I needed to know the psychoacoustic properties of how to hear space and how to perceive space, and I could apply that. So yeah, just this whole article or journal was insanely interesting, because this is how a sound source bounces off of the room and you hear it, and you're able to almost immediately, you may not realize it, but your brain can almost immediately plot out the shape of the room and know exactly what it's looking at, even without seeing it. Yet again, this is an excessive amount of information on this topic, but it's very, very interesting. I highly recommend you go read it. So yeah,